Yeah. So what, any big plans for the weekend?
No. We're like nonstop going play. Last weekend, well, for the long, actually kind of turned into a long weekend. We were up in Beacon, New York, which is
What's that?
upstate, like Hudson Valley. Really pretty small town, has a couple of cool museums. One of them is called Dia, which is what used to be a factory that printed Nabisco labels. But it closed down, and they took the space and they made it a giant art museum. It's all like this crazy industrial art. So it's like really, I don't know. I thought it was really cool. I mean, there's some like, stuff for us. It's like, here's a big piece of white paper that I put on the wall. You're supposed to project it. And like, no, I'm not doing that. So like,
Yeah.
there's some like, stuff in there, but
Mhm.
there's a lot of really excited this like big industrial clunky stuff. So like big
Mhm.
pieces of rusted metal and whatnot. And then there's an outdoor museum nearby called Storm King, and it's 250 acres kind of surrounded by state park that it was like this big parcel of land that this guy bought a long time ago, started collecting giant art pieces for, and eventually just opened it up to the public. So we spent an afternoon with what might have been white wine in a thermos walking around there and having fun. So that was cool.
Storm King,
Yeah.
New York.
There's some pretty
Storm
badass
King
stuff in
Art
there.
Center.
Gigantic
I love
sculptures.
stuff like that. Oh, yeah. Oh, and you never get this in big cities because the real estate is so freaking expensive.
Like
Oh, those are so gorgeous.
yeah, and like just I mean the views walking around there, you get like up on because it's a very hilly area, so you get up on like big hills like that, and you can just see crazy paths and cool stuff forever, and it's awesome to go there and hang out.
Wow, that is really nice.
Yeah,
Dang.
so went up there. Decided that
That's
we are
cool.
not moving to Beacon though, because the main street is 2 miles long, and once you're done with that, you're kind of done with that.
Yeah.
Not a lot.
I could retire in a small town under some circumstances, but I just
Yeah.
couldn't live there now. Yeah.
Right. So like it was like one of those things that like you could do, but there's a coffee shop, but there's not a Starbucks, and like there's stuff to do, but there's not a movie theater in town. Like it's all stuff you have to drive for. So it's just kind of like, great to visit, great to spend a weekend there, but after that you're kind of like, well,
Yeah. What else is there?
that's about it. But
If you
go ahead.
No, I was gonna say if you ever want to put your relationship under tremendous stress, go live in a place like that for 6 months. As Erica and I did that in Whitehall, Michigan, town of 3,000 people. In the winter when everybody gets snowed in and you can't really go out to restaurants and all that.
Right.
And we loved it. We did really well. She cooked the whole time, did all kinds of stuff. We would never do it again. But I'm like, we get through with that, and you go, oh, we must be okay if we didn't kill each other living through that, because that was.
Yeah, I think if we went past a weekend, things would have gotten rough.
Yeah.
One thing that we found really funny about that gets magnified in a small town is how like there's the good version and the crappy version of everything. There's like the nice liquor store and the crappy liquor store. There's like the nice pharmacy and the crappy pharmacy. So it's like you go into one place and you're like, oh, this is not what I expected.
This is the crappy one.
Like,
yeah.
There's plexiglass everywhere.
Where's your competitor? Where's the other one of these in this town?
Yeah. Like even with like wine bars, there was like one kind of crappy wine bar where you're like, oh, everything in here could kill termites, and the nice wine bar down the street where you're like, I want to stay here forever.
Yeah, charming locals.
Yeah, corks hanging in the windows off strands and stuff, and you're like, they thought about it.
Yeah. Oh, little towns can be so charming, can be so cute.
Absolutely.
Yeah, only in short bursts. And you have the opposite problem in New York City because there's like 5 million of everything, but then the competition's cutthroat. Right. You can't suck and keep your business up and running.
Even if you don't suck, your business business. Yeah. If you're like a block or two away from where you need to be, forget it.
Yep. Yeah, it's fun. It was funny. I was in LA yesterday and the day before, and I was going, okay, well, I want to go find ramen. I just love ramen, and I don't usually get to eat it that often. And so I go open it up in Yelp, and there's this place that's advertising at the top of Yelp, so-and-so's ramen. I'm like, why are you advertising when you have like 400 4-star reviews? And I go in and look at them, and they were great like 2 years ago, and all the ones in the last month are 1 star, 1 star, 1 star. Yeah, God. That place is just getting ready to crater. Well, folks, feel free to put in your questions in the GoToWebinar control or in the control panel with the questions over there. We go first come, first serve, and so we will start walking through these, folks. Wes Palmer says, when did you get the purple background? I always thought it was green. It was green like last apartment or 2 apartments ago. This one, it's technically supposed to be a dark blue, like a chroma key blue, but unfortunately I'm red-green colorblind, and my wife picked that out without consulting me. So I'm like, I know that's not right. I don't know what the right one is, but that's not it. Leah asks, I need help. I am out of ideas. Boy, are we the right people to ask. She says, I have multiple availability groups using SQL Server 2016. Every database is in its own availability group. However, I have one database that has a full transaction log file, and it's growing. It says the log reuse weight description says availability replica, but all replicas show everything is healthy. What can I do other than removing AGs or throwing the database in simple recovery model?
Kendra has a great post, Kendra, about why your availability group transaction log can be full without you having messed anything up.
Let's see if we can find it.
I
remember anything about? Yeah, let's see. Kendra Little transaction log site. Is it on her site or ours?
No, it's on hers.
Okay, hers. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Let's see. Little Kendra. Kendra.com. For those of you listening to the podcast, you can't see that we're, oh, perfect. You can't see that we're typing. Why is my transaction log growing in my availability group? Oh, she has an episode on it. Fantastic.
Yeah.
In her Dear SQL DBA podcast. Oh, that's nice. And I can't remember if she, so she doesn't transcribe the whole thing, but you can either get it in video or in audio. She does a great job on the podcast there. You should also totally subscribe to her podcast while you're there too. I off the top of my head, I can't remember what would cause that. Oh, obviously a long-running transaction, but that would be different. It wouldn't show availability group in the list there.
So like stuff like running out of disk space on the replica, like if your transaction log is full over there and it can't grow anymore to receive new transactions, it'll be stuck. And then, man, I had another good one where like stuff gets like it can't clear out row versioning, or no, that was TempDB. Where it can't. Oh man!
I was thinking if you added a file, if you add a file on an invalid drive letter, where the secondary doesn't have it, then the replication will stop working.
Yeah.
I would also check and see. Sometimes you think that things are healthy when you look at the availability group dashboard, but it's not, because the availability group dashboard stops updating when you run into worker thread exhaustion. You might actually not be in sync over on the other side. If this is a standard edition AG, you're not supposed to query the secondaries. It's not readable on the secondaries. If this is an enterprise, though, I would actually go in and look at the tables on the secondary just to make sure the data is actually up to date, because it may not be. James says, I have a 1.2 terabyte database and I need a database diagram. Do you recommend any good third-party tools?
Ooh, this is a Richie question, because Richie actually knows several of these. I can't remember any off the top of my head that I like.
I hear people say Irwin, ER Studio, Toad Data Modeler. Yeah. Those are the 3 that I hear the most often. I don't know anything about pros and cons to any of them, but I know they're expensive. Usually like $3,000, $4,000, $5,000.
Yeah, James. I mean, not to punt again. if you search back through our episodes about database diagrams, there's specifically one where Richie had talked about several different that he had used over the years that he had sort of various experiences with. So I would search back through office hours episodes and see if you can find searching for database diagrams, because Richie had a great answer about them.
So this isn't a good one to post on Stack Exchange, because they're like never post shopping list questions.
Right.
But the person I'd ask is Lewis Davidson. Davidson has a blog over on SQLblog.com. If you search for SQL blog Lewis Davidson, I bet his contact info is over there, and he wrote the book on relational data modeling. So for SQL Server, nice guy, has unbelievable sense of humor, super dry, like he's talking. You don't even realize the number of the jokes he's dropping in there. Next up, Brent, not me, but Brent, the other Brent, I shouldn't use last names, says his company is mandated that we're moving to the cloud. Now they're counting on me to come up with which service to use, AWS or Azure. What should I consider? Oh, that's good. So you have to work with all of them because we go through and do things like builder days.
Yeah.
What do you think about if you were going to go pick one? What were the kinds of things you'd think about?
Oh, which salesperson can fight the best? No,
Sure.
but I think what you should do and the way that you should decide which cloud service you want to pick is you should go to the Azure portal and try to figure it out.
Oh, that's just mean. That is just mean.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, but the good thing is you get a quick answer out of that.
Yeah. Come up with a list of like 4 or 5 things that you need to do. Spin up a new VM, take a snapshot backup of it. Trying to think of what are the other common things that I would do. Networking security. Holy cow. Spin up 2 VMs in 2 different areas of the U.S. or, internationally, wherever you want to do it, one on the East Coast, one on the West, and then get them to talk to each other, ideally without putting them both on the internet. Yeah. Holy cow, that's a pain in the rear.
I hope you like subnets. You're going to learn a lot about subnets.
And I don't want to sound like I'm shilling for anybody, but this is one of the things actually that Google does really well. Any of your VMs can talk to any of your other VMs, regardless of what data center they're in. You don't have to deal with any of the complex VPN stuff by default. The other thing I would ask your developers is, are there any services that are in one cloud that you're thinking about using that are not in other clouds? So, for example, Microsoft will try to pull you in with stuff like Azure Data Warehouse or Azure Data Lakes that are proprietary to them. Amazon will try to pull you in with things like Redshift, S3, services that they use that other people don't. Google will try to pull you in with like their Kubernetes type stuff. But just ask with your developers to see which ones they use.
Another thing I'd want to do is try to find instance sizes that are sort of commensurate to the machines that I have running now and kind of check out pricing there and see how, just see what's available that, you could probably get a close match on. Because one thing that you're going to find in the cloud, Brent talked about, networking. I'm just going to talk about networking speed, is that for the instance sizes that you want, that, that might make sense for, the kind of might be like a close match to the kind of machines you're running now. The networking and the disks that you get might not be all that hot.
When you go through and look at pricing in comparison to, I would start here, ec2instances.info. Now, this is only for Amazon, obviously. There's similar kinds of sites for Google and Azure. I think it's easier to find pricing for either Google or Azure. For example, with Google, there's no predefined machine types that really hone you in. You get a lot more knobs and buttons that you can play with for sizing. But in here, I love this EC2 instances comparison where you can choose what kind of licensing you want, whether or not you're worried about how many compute units you get, whether or not you're doing IPv6, all kinds of fun stuff. And then you can sort by that. So I can say, I want VMs with at least 60 gigs of RAM and at least 8 cores. And then I can sort by things like pricing. How much is Windows pricing on demand? All kinds of neat stuff.
But what's really important to pay attention to is that network performance column, because not all of those are so great. So like up to 10 gigabit, high doesn't even do all that high. High is high, and then you have moderate and low, and be careful.
They really are slow. They are desperately slow. Yeah. Same thing with storage throughput. If you go to columns and say EBS optimized throughput, you can see a lot of these are just dog slow. If you run Crystal Disk Mark and compare it to some of these, man, your data would be better off on a USB thumb drive. So,
and if you need really large sizes and you're deciding to go with Azure, then you might want to hold out for Azure managed instances, because those are pretty beefy sizes, and
it's wonderful. So Azure SQL DB, it doesn't sound like you're interested in, but Azure managed instances. So what are the kinds of things that would draw you towards managed instances that SQL DB doesn't have?
Oh, just size and some of the AG stuff, I guess.
Cross database queries is a big one.
Yeah.
Kevin asks, I couldn't watch all of the group buy sessions. Where can I see them now, please? I like that he asked please at the end of it. Go to group buy. Go to groupbuy.org, and there's a big thing up at the top that says watch past sessions. That's exactly where you should click. All totally free too. Amy says, is it okay to have the same login SID for databases that are on different SQL servers, production, backup, test, and dev? Oh, wow, I never thought about that.
Me either.
That'll be fine.
Actually,
Should be
never
totally
had.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because after all, you're going to probably restore, oh God, I'm going to get in so much trouble for saying this. What you're probably going to do in many environments is you're going to restore from production over to other places like test and dev, and then you get stabbed by some security auditor who goes, developers should never have production data, but this is the way the world works.
Mm-hmm. It's the agile way.
Yeah. Amy says, yes, I am. Thank you. Yeah, I figured someone would stab me for that. Samuel asks, what are the next steps in diagnosing async network I/O waits when I've confirmed that networking is not the issue?
Because doesn't it sound like it should be the network?
Yes. Oh, so many good job security.
Oh, that's good. So I would start with checking your SQL Server code and see if you're running any scalar functions or cursors in there that might be sending results to your application one row at a time. The next thing I would check is your actual application code and see if they're doing any processing on a data set that comes in like a for each loop, where like they'll take a row and they'll do some processing, and another row and do some processing. Because typically what async network I/O is when you have a client, when SQL is basically just shooting data at a client, and the client's not saying that it has all the data because it's doing a bunch of stuff client side.
You could run SP who is active, go run SP who is active and look at that wait stat column. In there, it'll show which queries are waiting for async network I/O, and then you can go back to those developers too. It shows you, I love SP who is active so much, shows you which machine it's coming from, all kinds of fun stuff. Next up, JH says, a developer was experiencing deadlocks, and I recommended to do their changes, inserts, updates, and deletes in smaller batches. Now that did turn out helping, but we're still experiencing some. Do you recommend locking isolation hints?
Not necessarily.
Mm-hmm. What would you start with first if you're facing deadlocks?
Well, I think it would depend on where the deadlocks are coming from a bit.
Okay.
Right. So, it usually if it's a couple of stored procs, and I would go and look at those, and I would maybe look for missing index requests, and I would maybe look at smarter ways to index for updates, because a lot of a reason that I come across that happens quite a bit for when deadlocks occur is that there's an update or a delete, and there's a where clause for it, but the where clause doesn't have an appropriate index. So SQL ends up escalating all sorts of locks up from, row to page locks or to table locks, and you end up with these kind of strict locks that get held for, the duration of the modification. And then anything else trying to do work around it kind of gets bonked. So I would just make sure that for my modification queries, whether they're, updates and deletes, there's a where clause that I'm kind of appropriately indexed for that.
I'd also say, too, make sure you don't have too many indexes. If you just, shop I was at yesterday had 60 to 70 indexes per table. And so whenever someone wanted to change data, we were having to grab locks across all kinds of indexes, because every index included like all kinds of fields from the table, fields that changed all the time. So you had to do way more locks than necessary. It usually seems like, I often joke with people that you should aim for 5 or less indexes per table and 5 or less fields per index. It's not that that's a magic number. It's just that the more indexes you start to have, the more problems you end up with, stuff like blocking and deadlocks. And the less indexes that you have, the more you run into that problem too. So
one really good and quick way to get yourself a diagnosis on this is during or after, or usually probably after one of those deadlocking things occurs, run SP Blitz Index and see if you get warnings for aggressive indexes. And aggressive indexes will point out indexes that have had significant row or page locks for, how long they've had them for. So you can kind of figure out which indexes have these long locks being held on them and which ones kind of might be the reason for the deadlocks occurring.
I remember the first time Kendra showed me that you could get locking stuff out of the index DMVs, and I was just, witchcraft. How is this even possible? And I used to try and focus too much on, what are the queries involved in the blocking and the deadlocking, but man, you don't even need it once you know which indexes are involved. Then it's easier to look at the tables and see how's our indexing strategy on those. Dawn says, good morning. I tend to use SQL Profiler to do an audit on queries or find the queries that are getting called from a web page. The developers won't tell me and I got to try to figure it out. With SQL Profiler being deprecated, is there a specific extended event that I can use to do this, or how should I learn the new way?
Don, I have such good news for you. Assuming that you're on a fairly modern version of SQL Server and using a fairly modern version of SSMS, when you go into extended events and you go into sessions, if you, okay, Brent's going to fire it up.
Oh, keep talking. Yeah.
And when you right-click on sessions and hit new session, one of your options under the general tab is you can use a template, and there are a whole bunch of templates in there that are equivalent to Profiler. So whatever you want to fire up for, whatever you would normally fire up for Profiler, you can probably find a pretty close match for Profiler equivalents. So you can do anything that you have in there, and then it gives you the definition of the extended event session once you get, once you kind of go on to other parts of it, and you can see which events they're tracking. So you can even narrow stuff down and pull stuff out and concentrate on stuff that you're familiar with in Profiler. So that's what I would recommend. If you're using Profiler to do something specific now like that, start with the templates there because they make your life a lot easier. Then you can get a lot of commensurate information out from across those.
Session name, I'm like, why can't I do this demo? And then you can hit the script up thing.
Don't be afraid to hit the configure button and kind of poke through because there's going to be a whole bunch of extra columns and filters and stuff that you might want to. I have a car being stolen behind me, but there's also just stuff that you might want to pull out or add into this session that you saw in Profiler that you're not seeing just off the bat in the what do you call it there?
Yeah,
the template.
I adore this too. I mean, watch live data isn't always completely accurate. It doesn't show things exactly when it comes in.
Sometimes it crashes Management Studio.
Yes. So there's a lot of gotchas with it. It just is nowhere near as bad as it used to be. The other thing I'll say though too is if you don't want to learn it, you don't have to. Like you can still continue to use Profiler. It's heavier. It isn't nearly as cool. Won't gather all kinds of cool stuff. But it still works. If you only need to use it part-time, like once a month or once a quarter, it still works fine. And it's still in SQL Server 2017. So,
go back to Management Studio real quick.
Oh, man, you're not my real dad.
Oh, come on. Let's see here. You have so much time to kill. So if you want to get results in Watch Live Data or in the data file faster, just turn max dispatch latency down to a lower number. Right now it's at 30 seconds, so it could take 30 seconds for stuff to go in. You can change that to 1 or 2 seconds, which is what I do sometimes in demos to get data into the file faster, which isn't necessarily a good idea on a production server, but if you just want to see the data faster, that's a knob you can tune to see it faster.
There's also, just as long as we're going through this, allow event loss. So you might look as you're going through the wizard, I shouldn't allow any loss of events whatsoever. No, don't do that. Let SQL Server drop some events because it's not mission critical and it'll be faster that way. Yeah. All right, let's see. What do we got next? Where'd my question window go? MM says, I assume that's not M&M. Times are hard in the rap business. Says,
I heard that new album, man.
He goes, all right, I give up. I'm going to go into databases. The company I'm working for uses the exact same ID and password for, now I see why you went anonymous with your name. Uses the exact same ID and password for the SQL proxy, command shell credential, owner for all jobs. All the developers know the password. My developers work in production. They log into SSMS as that ID in order to create jobs. I think this is bad and I want to change it. Is it okay for the proxy and credential to be the same? Man, that would be the least of my worries.
As long as all of management is aware of it and they are okay with it, I mean, I would maybe just not bark up that tree. If you wanted to, write them a nice email, or maybe have a brown bag meeting where you talk about, all the potential security problems that presents. Being a DBA and being a developer and handling data like this is a trust position. So, if you don't necessarily trust everyone accessing the environment, you may not want them to have access to all of your customer data or whatever data it is coming in. If it's medical data especially, that could be rough. But, I would make sure that everyone is aware of it and aware of the potential downsides of it. One thing that I will caution against, though, is just kind of shooting off the handle and changing a password, because you could make a bunch of stuff break like that.
The one thing I'll throw in there, I have up on the screen, I have this old blog post I wrote. I say old, I didn't realize it was only a year and a half ago. How to talk people out of the SA account. I give a graceful way to do it, and then in option 2, I give the really ugly way to do it that involves, after all, if everyone knows the SA password or whatever ID and password it is, you could go in and change things in the production database and play stupid. I don't know who dropped that table. Could have been anybody. Man, it's a shame we can't figure it out. But with all of you knowing the password, I guess there's just no way we'll ever know. Well, you got to stop people from doing that. I can't. My hands are tied. I'll see you again next week. I predict we'll have an outage on Thursday at 2. Whatever. Just make sure it's
all
the
your
right
queries are going to run really funny in about 5 minutes.
Oh,
you know what he could do? That store procedure that we wrote at the last DBA days, chaos slot, changes settings.
Oh, God, that was funny. Describe what that does.
So the nice way to put it is that at random, it will assign random, well, if you schedule it as an agent job, every time it runs, it will assign random values to a whole bunch of different important, to performance variables like max memory, cost threshold for parallelism, max stop. So you could just get wild variances in execution plans and, clearing the plan cache. All sorts of other bad stuff happens when you start changing that stuff on the fly. And Brent left a process running overnight while Chaos Sloth was also running. And just the wait stats were awful. It felt like me on the cruise ship where I was just... But, it was inspired by the Amazon Chaos Monkey thing that randomly goes and breaks things, where this would just randomly go and change things.
It's amazing. It's amazing Dell ever let us into their data center. That was pretty spectacular. Wes asks, have you ever used any data visualization tools? And if so, what are your favorites?
Excel.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah. It's easy, it's cheap, and it produces results that I can manage. But I don't know anything about visualization beyond that, though.
True story.
True story. And if you've ever seen any of my reports, you'll understand why. As you can see by this 3D pie chart filled with Pac-Man. Sri says, in a multi-site, always-on availability group, I like how you spelled it out absolutely perfectly there, Sri. You're already ahead of most shops. I have an even number of nodes. I've got 4 nodes, and I've got a quorum file share in my primary data center. What happens when my primary data center dies? Like if I have a flood, a disaster, will we be able to manually bring up our DR site?
Take it away, Brent.
All right. So assuming that, and it's easier, almost with the camera with my number of fingers. So I have 2 nodes in each data center, and then I also have the extra file share witness over in my primary data center. When you lose the majority of voters all at once, the 2 that are still remaining over in the DR data center, they don't know that they aren't just left alone in the cold, like maybe their internet connection died and they can't see the majority. So they will gracefully shut down their cluster services. Now, you can force them online. There's a set of steps that are documented in books online about forcing the cluster online, fixing quorum, then forcing SQL Server to start the AG with allow data losses on. But this is super dangerous, and there's the checklist to do this is like a 1.5 pages long in books online, and every one of the lines links off to other articles in books online. It is something that you want to rehearse the bejesus out of before you go and do it the first time. The thing that really worries me when folks do this too is whenever you fail over to that other data center, when you decide to pull the trigger, there is no easy way to get the data back from the other data center. The simple way to think about it is order IDs. Say you've got a table with an identity field, starts at 1 and goes up to a bajillion. In your primary data center, you had order ID number 100, and that one hadn't made it over to DR yet. Well, DR was only up at, say, order ID 90. When we fail over and we start inserting into the orders table, we're going to be using that order ID 100 again. And I have to be able to figure out, are these two different orders or are they the same order where fields have been changed? Tools like Redgate's Data Compare and Schema Compare will help you identify that there's differences, but not which one is right or whether it's two separate rows or one row. So it's super, super dangerous. It's something that you actually want to step through with as a company before you go live and understand what the ramifications are.
See, that was a much better answer than what I was going to give. I want to say maybe you should think about log shipping.
Yeah, so much easier. Yeah, because you lose the primary data center. The first thing you have to do when you go to fail over to DR is fix the cluster. Before you can even get started, you have to fix the cluster to bring that online. With log shipping, who cares? You just go live over on the other side.
And this is part of the reason why I have such a hard time finding HA and DR stuff sexy, is because it's like, wait, nope, everything is lost. it's like a dude saying he's not wearing any underwear. You're like, yeah, who cares?
Oh, it's amazing how I look at it and I go, if you do it wrong, it's way less reliable instead of more reliable. It's very easy to get less reliable. Now, either I just lost internet or Erik did, one of the two. Let me go look and see if I can. Yeah, I'm still pulling up internet pages, so it must just be Erik. Erik's frozen in time. So let's see. Sri says thank you, and Vlad says you are visible. Okay, cool. So Samuel says, I have an issue of a process logging into my SQL server using the DAC overnight, the dedicated admin connection. Can I run a trace like an extended events or profiler query to capture this user? You actually don't need to run a trace or an extended events type thing. The easy way to do it is just log SP who is active to a table. If you Google for, or if you go in, we'll go ahead and do it real quick on ours. If you search for log SP who is active to table, Tara Kaiser has a great post explaining how you go about doing this. There's two on here. Take a 2. The part 2 is the better one that goes in. I say better one, it's just newer. We go into more details there. So you can set this up as a job to run every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, however often that you want. Then there's also a parameter you may want to play around with. Show sleeping SPIDs, I believe it is. Let's go fire it open just to see if I've got this right. SP who is active. Show sleeping SPIDs, I think, equals 1. Look at that. I even remember. So this will catch even if someone just logs into the DAC and doesn't do anything. If you wanted to get more specific about which query is which, like which query is using the DAC, you could go into more detail through things like sysdm exec sessions. But I would just do this because it's a great technique to understand how to use for all kinds of reasons. I know a lot of shops, a lot is probably a stretch. I know some shops who will set up a job to log SP who is active to a table. They'll set up an agent job to do it and a schedule like every minute. And they'll just only enable it when they know they're going to have, or they're having problems. They'll teach their help desk staff to go enable that job. So since you know roughly when it's happening, you could simply schedule the job to run during those windows and you'll be able to catch the culprit pretty quickly. Finally, the last question we'll do today, let's see here. JH says, I recall seeing a YouTube clip of Grant Fritchie saying maybe not always change the max stop is the default. Is there a time when it changes? Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I'm going to throw a link up here on the page so y'all can see it. If you go to brentozar.com/go/cxpacket, and I'll copy paste that out so I can paste it in again whenever the page refreshes. brentozar.com/go/cxpacket. I've got a video on there where I explain what's going on with max stop, what's going on with cost threshold. And I haven't seen that clip from Grant, but I can tell you, because I can probably agree with it, there are probably cases where you don't want to throttle down how many cores your query gets. However, the gotcha with that is it's usually talking about fairly small servers. So think like, say, 8 to 12 cores as opposed to 16, 32, 64 cores. It's extremely rare that on a 16-core server or a 32-core server that you actually want one query going parallel across all of those threads. Because remember, it's not like just one query is going to go parallel. Odds are you're going to have a bunch of queries going parallel, and it can cause a problem. The typical scenarios where you want to go with a larger max stop are things like data warehouses, where you have a really repeatable load every day, and then you have repeatable nightly scheduled reports that come in and do big, huge, ugly, awful queries. What's cool about data warehouses is you can change your max stop over time, say run experiments from one week to the next to figure out where your sweet spot on max stop is. This is one of the experiments we ran at Dell DBA days. Both Erik and Doug had run experiments on this. One of them was an experiment on CheckDB max stop, for example, where we found that the sweet spot for some workloads or some databases was closer to 14 or 18 in terms of max stop. Well, all right, that sums up today's office hours. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out. If you have a question that we didn't get to, feel free to go over to dba.stackexchange.com. We're over there all the time posting answers on that, and we'll see you guys over there. See y'all next week at office hours.